I want to read you what Bobby Marks said about Jonathan Kuminga. He said he basically controls free agency in Golden State. If they sign him to a contract and bring him back, then that's really it as far as what they can do in the offseason. So meaning if the Warriors have Kuminga in their plans and they sign him, like shut down the rest of the offseason, they, whomever they draft or whatever. But that's really it, just because of the number that they would bring him back at. And then he said, in addition to, actually, this isn't necessarily the same quote, but from the same article, in addition to signing Kuminga to a long-term contract and the sign and trade outcomes, as a restricted free agent, he can agree to an offer sheet with another team, which the Warriors have an opportunity to match. That's restricted free agency, what we've been talking about. He could also sign a $7.9 million qualifying offer to play this season or this upcoming season, and then he'd be an unrestricted free agent. Doesn't sound like that is going to happen. So it appears the Warriors either will sign Kuminga to a long-term contract, which will leave them with very little financial flexibility in free agent, or facilitate a sign and trade that brings in a player or players that are a better fit in Coach Kerr's rotation. So I think we all kind of know that. Listeners probably know that if you're following very closely. What option do you like best? As a Kuminga fan, option A, you sign Kuminga to a long-term contract, but you've basically, that's it. You can't really do too much else with your roster unless you do make some trades. There's a Moses Moody, there's a Pajemski, something like that. You would have to then trade one of those guys. Or do you do a sign and trade where you're sending Kuminga out and bringing pieces back that maybe fit your team better? Which of those two scenarios do you think is going to be better for the Warriors in the 25-26 season?
I think what's better for the Warriors is to sign and trade him. But I also think what's potentially more realistic is to sign him, wait for the date in which he can be traded again, which is like early January or something, if he were to sign the extension, and then to trade him then, because you could trade the full amount of the contract then. Whereas if you sign and trade him now, you could only trade half of what, like if he signs a $30 million contract, you can only sign and trade, and only $15 million of that would go towards, bringing in another player. So, I keep throwing around the name Kobe White, and the reason I do is because I think he's a good player on a lower contract. So that's why I think that, I don't know if he's available or not, but just it's that combination of young, talented player on cheap contract that sign and trade scenario would work for. Lauri Markkanen's another. I know that no one wants to hear that name after what happened last season, but just another example of a player that's, Lauri did send that extension with Utah. I forgot how much. But then we just go into the conversation of Kuminga, Moody, and Pods again.
Mm-hmm.
But that's why I keep saying Kobe White, because he's on a $12 million expiring contract this year. Like, wouldn't that be the best thing to do, is to try and get Kobe White for that expiring deal, and then it just goes away after this year if you don't, want to extend him? Or actually, Lowry's at 46 now.
That's kind of what they did in the CP trade, though, right?
Where they just kind of let it go. But CP was a $30 million number that could have been used, to get you someone who made a little bit more money. So a little different there, but I see what you're saying, because, that stopped us from maybe, a different season. So my thought process is that I think it's more likely that Kuminga gets signed, because they're free agents. It's GP2 and Looney. And then, of course, some of the smaller amount players like Kevin Knox and stuff. But like GP2 and Looney are the only players on this team that are, besides Kuminga, are free agents. But Kuminga's restricted. They're unrestricted. So
you're willing to bring him back, and then they really don't make any adjustments. So at least for the first 2 or 3 months of the season, you're essentially rolling out the same squad as last year.
I mean, I don't know if it's my preferred option, but I think it's probably the more likely one. I do wonder how quickly that decision will be made. That's kind of what I keep hearing reports from Windhorse that like this free agency is going to start off with a bang, and it sounds like the Kevin Durant San Antonio thing's already done.
Is
But
Giannis going to get traded?
it's I mean, they're saying him and the Milwaukee Bucks are saying no, but I can't unless his wife and children are so happy in Milwaukee.
Maybe
I
he's
can't
worried about
imagine
his
how that'd be the
brother.
case. Thanasis has no team if he goes. I mean, hell, Thanasis can have a spot on the Warriors.
Yeah, he can come. He can come play. Be 15th man.
Yeah, it's not my preference my preference is the Kobe White thing, and it's not just exclusive to Kobe White. I have to think of a couple more players that can fit this thing because again, I don't know if he's available. I thought he ended the year really well, and MT was kind of throwing around his name, and I was like, oh, maybe there's a chance. But he did end the year really well, and he's young. I don't know why Chicago would want to get rid of him, but that's kind of the thing I'm looking at is, okay, do the sign and trade. Sure, it doesn't use the 100% of his salary to get back a player. It uses 50%, but the player we want anyways doesn't make that much money, so it would actually work in that scenario. I wonder what Kuminga's value is now, though, because Houston Rockets series, you would have thought that you would have had to give up a pick to get off of this player. Minnesota series comes around, he kind of shows like, hey, give me touches, and maybe there's an all-star there. So, is the Cam Johnson thing still there? I just don't know who's out there right now that says I want Jonathan Kuminga. Detroit keeps doing all these, like any opportunity they get, they add an athlete. Whether, even though I don't think they should, as a 1-year Detroit Pistons fan from 2022, I don't think they should keep adding athletes. But every chance they get, they add one.
That was your recast squad.
That was. What's your take? What do you think?
Let me read you. Kawakami had a mailbag in the Standard, and he wrote, the Kuminga questions, which already are wearing on the Warriors, would be a constant presence if he comes back. Is he guaranteed a full rotation spot? What happens the first time Kerr plays him only 12 minutes? Is the offense changing? Is Kuminga getting better? What do Steph, Jimmy, and Dre think? What does Joe Lacob think? Will they trade Kuminga by December, February? Never? That's a lot and probably too much. So basically what Tim was answering was someone had asked him kind of about the previous two players who they actually did. One traded, Jordan Poole, and one they just let go to free agency, Klay Thompson. Having those guys on the roster for that season was kind of detrimental to maybe the stability of the locker room or whatever. And this is not even Jordan's fault, right? This is Draymond's fault, really. But he was saying if you keep Kuminga, you have all of these unanswered questions, and this is kind of looming over the entire season. So you may be, because you were saying wait to get the maximum value in a trade from him. And I think Tim is saying maybe you just do it now and rip off the Band-Aid, because you don't then have this cloud hanging over the team. And Jonathan, because Jonathan will know all of the options, right? Mike Dunleavy will be able to do a bunch of different things, and Kuminga's marketability is dependent on whether or not his coach plays him. And I know I read the comments on our page here, and half of those comments are get rid of him because he's not a good player and he's not a good fit. And the other half are, this is all Steve Kerr's fault. If he just played the guy, they would have all of these answers already. And so even, it's very in the middle, even as far as the fan base is concerned. It's very polarizing. And I loved Tom Tolbert. His analogy was Jonathan Kuminga is the new Belt Wars from when Brandon Belt was the Giants' first baseman, and half of the fan base loved him and half of the fan base wanted to replace him every single year. And that's kind of what it is with Kuminga. The thing about Kuminga, though, is, even us, we've been on Team Kuminga just because he's young, and you see certain things that feel untapped. But that's a lot of the NBA players who don't actually quite get to superstardom, right? Everyone's talented, and it's who actually gets better and becomes a star and who doesn't. More than likely, the answer is that he's not. But then there's that small chance that he does become a great player, and if he leaves this team and becomes an excellent player on another team, then you're like, oh man, why didn't we figure that out? But if we're looking at what sort of history is, it's like Wiseman, they gave up on Wiseman. They've had other younger players who seem to be great fits and they kind of fizzled out. And JK's been here now since the title year, the last title year. And there are glimpses, and then there are things where you're like, man, he's gonna wave off Steph. Like Steph's doing all of this running, and he's trying to get open, and Kuminga's like, nope, I got this one. So who knows? I would prefer that whatever that decision is, that it would be pretty decisive, and that we don't have to keep talking about this. But then again, that goes against what you're saying, which is you probably maximize your leverage if you do trade him after the beginning of next year or whatever that date is. That is probably the smartest play, and that sounds like the Mike Dunleavy play, because we know Mike is not making rash decisions. Like Mike is waiting things out. Like they waited all the way until the very end to figure out that Kevin Durant did not want to come back before switching to Jimmy. I'll have a story about. I was wondering if you heard this story in a second. So my guess is the Mike Dunleavy way is your way. I would prefer that they just decide. Either sign him and he's on the team, which I probably think is less than 50%, probably even less than 25%, or just sign and trade now, get it over with, and we can move on and we can add the pieces, because you want to, you what do we got? 2 years left, a year and a half left of figuring this thing out. And then they're going to trade Jimmy. Like imagine being Jimmy. You're just like, I know I'm getting traded at some point. I just hope that we can run it back at least one more year. So that is
if Dunleavy is of my thinking, and we know Joey Lacob thinks that Kuminga is baby honest.
Yeah, Joey Lacob's like, nope, we're signing this guy, 5-year deal. He's going to be the future when Steph retires.
Exactly. So if the GM thinks that maybe we should keep him on the roster and maximize leverage, but the owner thinks we should keep him forever, there's no one in position of power that maybe thinks they should trade him right now. I'm not of the camp. Like I saw the Wiseman thing, right? I wanted to hang on to Wiseman and try to maximize value or even see what he could become on this team. They ended up trading him for 4 second-round picks that turned into Gary Payton, GP2, and even as low as a value as that looking back at it right now, they won the trade. Even though they've had nothing come of it, no championships or anything, but you would have to attach many assets to take it off of whatever Wiseman's contract might be right now. So
Wiseman, man, I really feel bad for that guy.
Me too. But I'm not of the camp of like, I think that Jonathan Kuminga will not reach his full potential on the Golden State Warriors. And I don't think his full potential is that of a superstar. I think it's like maybe like on the brink of being an all-star every couple of years. So like, I'm not saying keep him because I think he should be on this team. I was just saying keep him because, maybe there is a trade deadline.
You're trying to maximize leverage.
Yeah. But if you get Kobe White, do it. That's my take. If you can get Kobe White, do it. If you can get a player of that caliber that you can do in the sign and trade, do it. I just don't think that's available. Who does TK want?
He wants Trey Murphy.
That's never going to happen.
That's who he wants.
Why does everyone think Trey Murphy's available?
So this was actually a discussion on the Bill Simmons podcast from the other day with Russillo. Bill went through a list of guys and he was like, all right, when you think that there is someone who is not on the table, let me know. And he went through Giannis, he went through Jaylen Brown, and he didn't raise his voice until Trey Murphy was named.
Russillo?
He's like, why would they trade him for? And Bill's like, what if they bring in a new GM? They just want to blow everything up. They want to start all over. and so he didn't
So
believe
dumb.
that he was going to be traded either.
It's like they've said, who is the GM again? It's like, oh, who I forgot.
I said like Joe Dumars.
It's Dumars. Yeah, it is Dumars. And he said he's committed to Zion, which I don't totally believe. But if he is committed to Zion, what kind of player do you want to put around him? A defensive player who could shoot from like 5 feet behind the 3-point line, that is like blooming into a superstorm with super athleticism.
No,
and okay, what if he
add Kuminga so that Zion and Kuminga just bump into each other on the court.
But even if they didn't have Zion, like you would still just want, like, Trey Murphy is becoming,
you'd want Trey Murphy and Kuminga on the same team.
Yeah. Yeah, give us Zion.